Let's start with the Old Testament transmitted in the Hebrew language. It says all modern Bibles are translations of older texts. The scriptures used by most readers of this book, the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, whether Jewish, Protestant, or Roman Catholic, are based on much older manuscripts that have been translated into English. The three most important of these older Bibles are known as the Masoretic Text, the Septuagint, and the Samaritan Pentateuch. We're going to cover what those three are. It's important to be aware of all three of those. They give a really good short summary of all three. And it'll give you some working knowledge of what's behind most Old Testaments. What manuscripts are there? What do we know? What can we lay our hands on? Scholars believe that the books in these three texts are from pre-Christian times, but unfortunately no really early manuscripts were available before the Dead Sea Scrolls. Translations were made from the oldest available manuscripts, most of them medieval. So like the one I just showed you, the Leningrad Codex, that's a medieval manuscript, 1,000 years after Jesus. So as far as the Masoretic Text, what exactly is that? Here's what they say. Almost all modern English translations of the Old Testament are based on a single manuscript, the Leningrad Codex, which was copied in 1008 AD after Jesus, and is our earliest complete copy of the Masoretic or rabbinic text of the Hebrew Bible. I'll show that to you again here on the screen. So there it is. Almost everything that you read in the Old Testament based on this one codex, 1,000 years after Jesus. It continues, though. That's not all that is available, though. Another important manuscript is the Aleppo Codex, which forms the basis of a new edition of the Hebrew Bible, but currently being produced at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So some translations are starting to incorporate the Aleppo Codex. And so the Leningrad Codex that I just showed you, slightly older than the Aleppo Codex. The Aleppo Codex is about 925 CE, so a little bit older. But there will be variants. There will be differences between the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex. So the editors or the translators at that point have to determine which reading they're going to go with when there's a difference. The manuscript was copied in about 925 CE, or so AD, and is thus earlier than the Leningrad Codex. However, a substantial part has been lost. So that's why we say it's not the earliest complete Hebrew copy of the Old Testament. It is a little bit earlier, but it's not complete. Substantial part has been lost, which means that for some books, the Hebrew University Project must rely on the Leningrad Codex and other Hebrew manuscripts. Both the Leningrad Codex and the Aleppo Codex are part of what is known as the Masoretic Text. You ever heard of the Masoretes or Masoretic Text? Here's what this means. This term is quite complicated since it covers many manuscripts rather than a single one. Masoretic group or Masoretic family would thus be a more accurate name. It's a group of manuscripts, a family of manuscripts. Masoretic manuscripts, including the Leningrad Codex and the Aleppo Codex, contain the books of the Hebrew Bible in the threefold arrangement that was developed by the rabbis and is found in modern Jewish Bibles, the Torah, the Prophet, and the writings, though the specific order of books sometimes vary between manuscripts. Now, the form of the Old Testament text, now found in the Masoretic text, grew and was finalized in three periods or three stages. So when you talk about Masoretic text, you're not talking about just one time period. It's something that developed over actually a significant amount of time. Let's look at those three time periods. Number one, the first stage originated among Babylonian Jews and the Pharisees or temple circles, and ended with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, or perhaps with the end of the Second Jewish Revolt in 135 AD. Okay, so that's the first stage, with Jews coming out of Babylon, out of that exile. The Pharisees, of course, mentioned there in the New Testament, and a little bit later than that. The Second Jewish Revolt, maybe at the latest. That's the first stage where this Masoretic text or group of texts is being developed. The second stage extended from the destruction of the temple in 70 AD until the 8th century AD, so about 700 years after Jesus, and was characterized by more and more textual consistency as rabbinic scholars sought to standardize the text of the Hebrew Bible. So during this time period, they began to be more proficient in how they copy things. In the first stage, it was just all over the place, wide range. You could have a copy of Jeremiah being 13% less than another copy of Jeremiah, which we'll see here in a little bit. Widely different. They didn't have the standard practices, the scribal practices and standards that maybe began to be used a little bit later, as we'll see here in a moment. The third stage extended from the 8th century AD until the end of the Middle Ages, and was characterized by almost complete textual uniformity. This is when you started to get Masoretes, who were really proficient in their scriptoriums, and they would count the letters on each line and make sure it added up to a certain number to make sure that they copied everything letter for letter perfectly. They had a very meticulous process of copying things, and so they were very rigorous, very solid, very accurate in how they copied manuscripts by this time period. But that's by the Middle Ages. That's by the medieval period. That does not reflect scribal practices from the time of Jesus and maybe even 700 years after Jesus, or let alone before Jesus. We know at that time period, scribes, especially Christian scribes, all over the place for a number of reasons. Sometimes deliberately altering the text, at other times not deliberately, unintentionally altering the text. Many times, if not in most cases, in certain time periods, the scribes were not pros, they were not professionals. So there's a lot going on, very loose standards at that time period. Many of the church fathers complained about it. Well, by this time, however, they became very, very rigorous in how they did things. But one of the problems is the Masoretes would tend to burn the manuscript that they were copying from. So once they made a copy, they burnt the old one. Why is that an issue? Well, because it doesn't really give us a whole lot of copies of the Old Testament to work with. That's why the oldest complete Hebrew Old Testament is 1,000 years after Jesus. Just most of this did not survive, especially when they're burning the manuscripts that they're copying from. That's why you just don't have a whole lot of copies of the Old Testament. The third stage extended from the 8th century until the end of the Middle Ages and was copied by almost complete textual uniformity. During this period, a group of Jewish scholars known as the Masoretes set out to produce a standard text of the Hebrew Bible, one that in their eyes would be true to the scriptures revealed by God in ancient times. Since the ancient text consisted only of Hebrew consonants without any vowels, many readings were open to diverse meanings. Compare DG in English, the letters DG in English, which could be dig, dog, or dug, right? If all you have is consonants, Well, you can fill in the vowels, but come up with different words. Same thing is going on with the Hebrew. They're jumbling all of the text together, the letters together, and the letters are just consonants. There's no vowels there. So you could end up coming to different words. So what they did is they began to standardize the vowels here and the pronunciation, and they began to add certain dots to indicate what the vowels are. But this is coming a good 800 years after Jesus. Depending on which vowel is used, you can get different words. The Masoretic solution was to add vowels, accents, and Masoretic notes, which required fixed meanings for groups of consonants. As a result, the Masoretic text became almost completely standardized during this time. It is in the standardized form of the Hebrew Bible that is found in the Leningrad Codex and the Aleppo Codex, and upon which the Old Testaments of most English Bibles are based. So again, if you look at this of the Leningrad Codex, you can see the vowels added here. You can see like dots, and you can see a dash added there. These indicates different vowels added by the Masoretes. Here's the Aleppo Codex, and you can see that on the Aleppo Codex as well. See the vowels by the dots, 2 dots here, 3 dots there. You can see a little dash there. You see that? So these indicate different vowels. So that's what they're referring to. Because the Masoretic text has become the Bible of Judaism and is the main text of the Old Testament used by scholars and Bible translators, its relationship to the biblical Dead Sea Scrolls is an important issue. In the translation presented in this book, they go a little bit over the translation. Hey, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, and if you want to support the channel, visit patreon.com/Reason and Theology.